On a frozen night in Silver Ridge, Deputy Jack Turner's patrol turned into a rescue. A pregnant German shepherd lay chained and beaten, her eyes pleading for help. Jack freed her only to discover she carried secrets maps, hidden codes, and a target painted by men who saw her as nothing but profit. As snow buried the town, Jack faced betrayal, gunfire, and new life born in the storm. Like and subscribe if you believe loyalty can outshine cruelty. Snow came down in sheets so thick the world looked sanded away. The two-lane outside Silver Ridge reduced to a ribbon of dim reflectors and wind. Deputy Sheriff Jack Turner kept his cruiser's slow tires whispering on packed ice heater, thumping a stubborn rhythm in the dashboard. He had the look many men bring home from years of quiet duty, watchful eyes, steady hands, and the habit of listening to a room before stepping fully into it. The storm gave back little, just the hiss of driven flakes and the distant groan of pine, yet something in it felt off a hollow in the night where sound ought to be. Jack lowered his window an inch to the knife-cold air. Diesel, wet metal, and a sharper edge like old blood in snow. He rolled to the shoulder at a sagging line of fence posts and let his high beams lay a white corridor through the gusts. A shape flinched in that light, a man hunched near a rusted gate, shoulders rising and falling, boots planted wide. Beside him, chained short to a post, a German shepherd struggled to rise, belly-round sides fluttering with frightened breath. The man swung something a cut length of wood, maybe, and barked a sentence that the wind peeled apart. Jack's hand went to the radio but stopped halfway. This storm had stretched the county thin. Backup was a half hour and a drifted mile away. He clicked his spotlight on, stepped out into the wind, and let the door thud shut behind him. Sheriff's office. He called voice, even, not shouting, not pleading. "Put it down and step back." The man turned jaw tight, a slice of a smile without warmth. Jack knew the face from too many reports and too friendly bar owners, Ricky Vaughn. Ricky's eyes flicked past Jack right down the road as if he were reading traffic that wasn't there. He didn't look surprised to be found. He looked impatient. "Evening," Ricky said, voice low and strangely calm. The shepherd's ears flattened. The chain jingled once a small, hopeless sound. Jack kept his hands open at chest height. "Let's make this simple. Drop the stick. Step back, palms where I can see them. No one gets hurt tonight." Ricky let the wood fall, but only to dangle from his fingers. The storm swirled, wrapping him in a gray veil. "You picked a bad stretch to stop, Deputy," he said, almost conversational. "Road closes 2 miles up when the plows turn around. Folks get stuck out here." He tilted his chin toward the shepherd. "Cargo gets skittish in weather like this." Jack filed away the word, cargo. He took 2 slow steps closer, putting his body between Ricky and the dog. The shepherd's breathing hitched. She tried to stand again and couldn't. Up close, Jack saw the tightness in her face, the tremor in the muscles near her hips. Not long to go. He also saw the chains bite in the fur, the makeshift collar knotted from nylon strap, and a dark stain where it met her neck. "What's her name?" Jack asked. Ricky blinked like the question offended him. Then he glanced past Jack again, quick and sharp, as if he were measuring headlights yet to arrive. That glance told Jack more than any answer. Whoever Ricky was waiting for was late, and the storm was eating the schedule. "Step away," Jack repeated, and the second repetition carried weight. The wood clattered into the drift. Ricky lifted his hands at last. "You do what you need to do," he said. "But you're in someone's way, not mine." The faintest twitch of his mouth, not quite a smile, not quite a threat, and then he pivoted into the wind, head down, boots, carving a diagonal across the ditch toward a line of scrub that would swallow him in a dozen strides. Jack let him go. He had a living thing on the ground he could not leave. He holstered, knelt, and felt the chain with gloved fingers. Frozen. He clipped a folding tool from his belt, worked at the padlock with patient pressure until the brittle metal gave with a short, surrendering snap. The shepherd flinched and then sagged forward against his knee as if a single degree of freedom had opened a door inside her. "Easy," he murmured, and the habit of speaking to frightened animals came back like muscle memory. "You're all right. I've got you." The wind cut his ears raw. He shrugged out of his duty jacket and wrapped it around the dog's shoulders, feeling the heat of her through the soaked fur. When he slid his hand along her ear, checking for tears, his thumb caught on a ridge of scar, not random, not ragged, but a neat thin line. He gently rotated the ear and found the mark in the inner skin, a tattoo letters and numbers tidy as a ledger, the kind of code that belongs to a K9 with a service record. Not a stray. A professional. Someone somewhere had called her partner. A weight moved behind Jack's sternum. He let the ear fall back into place and studied the collar, a cheap buckle with a little extra thickness along one edge. He pressed it and felt a soft give, the sensation of tape over plastic. He peeled a strip of black adhesive with his thumbnail until a seam lifted, revealing a narrow pocket stitched from the inside. He pinched out a folded scrap. Even in the wind, he knew it for what it was, a paper map old school with 2 routes traced in red, one hugging the back roads to the county line, one zigzagging through timber property to a snowmobile trail that the plows never touched. The edges were greasy with handling. Someone had planned these lines. Someone had carried them. And Ricky had been waiting for that someone right here in the dark with the storm to cover the rest. The shepherd nudged his wrist with her nose, a small apology for needing him. He slid an arm beneath her chest, another under her hindquarters, and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, but he had lifted sandbags in worse wind and carried old men out of ditches at 2 in the morning when the rivers rose. He moved steady, not fast, keeping his steps wide. The cruiser's back seat was a cocoon of relative warmth. He let her down gently, tucked the jacket tighter, and felt the tug of caution in his throat. If he radioed the station now, the air would fill with chatter. Chatter carried in a small town, even in a storm, especially when roads were closed and all the wrong people had scanners. If he waited, he could be at Dr. Emily Carter's clinic in 12 minutes 13 if the drift at the curve had hardened. He set the paper scrap in an evidence sleeve from the glove box, sealed it, laid it on the passenger seat, and then paused with his hand on the key. Out at the fence line, the snow had already swallowed most of Ricky's tracks. But the way his eyes had kept cutting past Jack, measuring an arrival that hadn't happened, said this spot was a handoff point. The runaway clock said the receiver might still be inbound. Jack killed the spotlight and let darkness regather. He sat with the engine idling and watched the road's pale smudge in his mirror wipers, dragging a slow metronome. He counted breaths to 20 and saw nothing but wind. 20 more. Headlights far off a dim float in the storm, then gone, as if the driver reconsidered the approach. The sheriff's frequency murmured alive with a plow foreman calling a closure near Birch Valley. No mention of a stalled vehicle. No mention of men on foot. Jack eased the cruiser into gear. "Hang on," he said to the dog, then caught himself and softened his tone. "Not far." The clinic stood at the edge of town, a low building with a green lamp that burned all night in winter for emergencies. He drove as if the road were a thread he might break by tugging too hard, eyes flicking between forward glass and rear view. Twice he saw shadows shift where snow sculpted fences, and twice he told himself it was wind and not regret walking behind him. In the mirror, the shepherd's eyes found him reflective gold points in the dim. She was steady now that she was warm, but the tenseness in her body spoke of hours that had asked too much. Traffic lights cycled pointlessly over an empty main street. He pulled behind the clinic, took the shepherd up in his arms again, and shouldered through the side door that Dr. Carter kept on a keyed latch for nights like this. The smell of antiseptic and cedar bedding cut the smell of snow and the quiet there. The human quiet seemed almost holy. He set the shepherd on a blanket and dialed Emily with his free hand. When her voice answered sleep-thick but alert, he said only, "I've got a pregnant German shepherd in rough shape. She's marked as a former K9. A pause, then the rustle of a coat. 10 minutes, she said. Jack hung up and crouched. The dog's breath came in long, careful pulls, now eyes tracking his hands. He spoke the way you speak to a veteran you find on a cold porch, soft, respecting the distance but offering warmth anyway. "You're not cargo," he said, almost a vow. Outside, the storm shouldered the walls and hissed along the eaves, patient as a tide. Inside, he unfolded the map again and traced the red lines with a forefinger, seeing not routes but intentions. He thought of Ricky's glance into the dark, and of headlights that had wavered and then vanished, and he knew with a quiet certainty that this night wasn't an isolated cruelty. It was the first exposed wire in a live circuit humming under the snow. He slid the map back into its sleeve, wrote the time and place on the label, and looked once more at the dog. "Someone trained you to stand your ground," he said. "I won't make you do it alone." In the parking lot, a plow passed its amber light brushing the windows like a slow lighthouse beam. Jack let the moment settle into his bones, the cold at his back, the warmth before him, the narrow space where duty and mercy met and shook hands. He had arrived in the storm as a routine patrol. He would leave it with a secret in an ear and a plan unfolding under his fingertips. The door opened then, and cold spilled in along with Dr. Emily Carter wool cap down to her brows, eyes clear. "Show me," she said. Jack gestured to the shepherd, and for a heartbeat, the room held nothing but their 3 breaths, the dog's belly lifting and falling, the future inside her waiting for a safer hour. Jack straightened the storm tugging at the back of his coat like a reminder. Out there, a late arrival had turned away. It would find another road, or double back. Either way, the night had chosen its lines. He had chosen his. Jack Turner remained in the back room of the small clinic standing near the metal counter, where the German shepherd lay curled under Dr. Emily Carter's careful hands. The storm outside beat against the windows, gusts rattling the glass as though the wind itself wanted in. Emily's gloved fingers moved over the dog's side, checking pulse and breath, while Jack unfolded the narrow scrap of paper he had found, stitched into the collar. The map was no ordinary trail guide. 2 thin red lines wound across county roads and service tracks, both ending near the border. Each route passed remote timber properties and snowmobile trails, roads no patrols bothered to check when storms shut the county down. Emily leaned over his shoulder, briefly whispering that someone had deliberately hidden it there, and if this dog once served as a K9, she had been meant to carry something far more dangerous than her own unborn pups. Jack's thoughts churned like the storm outside. Ricky had abandoned the scene too quickly, too calmly. He had not looked like a man afraid of arrest. He had looked like a man missing an appointment. That made this map less of a mystery and more of a schedule. Jack sealed it in an evidence pouch again and asked Emily to keep the shepherd warm while he checked the lot. She nodded, eyes full of quiet understanding, and Jack stepped out into the storm. His boots sank deep in powder, the cold air burning his lungs, but habit kept his eyes sweeping left and right. The night carried faint light from the plows still pushing main roads, and as he adjusted his hat against the wind, a low rumble carried over the rise. He turned toward it and saw a snowplow cresting the bend, headlights blurred in the storm. The machine slowed as it neared chains clinking against ice, and the driver gave a casual wave. Jack recognized him, Carl Harris, one of the county contractors who had cleared roads for 20 winters. Carl stopped engine idling wipers clacking across the windshield and leaned out of his window to call over the wind. "Saw your cruiser parked back there by the fence. Everything all right, Deputy?" His tone was light, neighborly, but Jack had spent too long reading faces not to notice the tightness in the man's jaw. Jack answered with care, telling him only that he had picked up a stranded animal. Carl nodded too quickly, eyes flicking past Jack toward the clinic door. "Storm's a rough one," he said. "Roads'll stay shut all night." He lingered longer than a man making small talk should. Then Jack saw it. Carl's right hand slipped to the seat beside him where a small CB radio glowed faint orange. He pressed the switch down, voice low, a string of words too muffled for Jack to catch, but the intent was unmistakable. Carl Harris was reporting something, and it was not to the county plow office. Jack stepped closer, his tone still calm. "Who's on the other end?" "Carl." The driver startled just enough to betray himself before masking it with a chuckle. "Dispatch," he said, "just giving them a weather note." Jack rested one hand on the cold doorframe of the plow, letting silence stretch. The storm hissed around them, filling gaps words could not. Carl avoided his eyes, tapping the steering wheel as if impatient to move on. Jack leaned slightly and saw a scrap of paper taped to the dash, a sequence of numbers and letters in red marker, the kind of code no road crew used. His suspicion hardened. "Get home safe." "Carl," Jack said, backing away, voice even. "Storm's not forgiving tonight." Carl nodded quickly, shifted gears, and let the heavy machine grind forward, taillights swallowed by snow. Jack stood in the swirling dark, watching until the glow vanished. His instincts sharpened over years of service, and nights like this told him that call had nothing to do with dispatch. Ricky Vaughn had left as if someone was coming, and now a man with a plow and a radio had sent out word within minutes of the rescue. That was not coincidence. He returned inside, stomping snow from his boots, and found Emily setting up fluids for the shepherd. Her face lifted in question. Jack told her quietly that someone might already know where they were. Her eyes tightened, but she did not ask for reassurance. She only said, "Then we keep her quiet and hidden." Jack nodded, but his mind was already turning toward the map again. Routes across the border, a handler who never showed, and a plow driver passing information under cover of a storm. Each piece pressed into place with the weight of something larger. He checked his service weapon, radioed a short coded message to the station, and sat near the window with the evidence pouch spread before him. Snow blurred the glass, making the world outside an indistinct smear, but Jack had the sense of movement out there, the kind that came with watchful eyes. He promised himself two things: to protect the shepherd through the night, and to follow that map until the hidden lines became names. Inside the quiet warmth of Dr. Emily Carter's clinic, the storm's voice was muffled but never gone. A steady roar beyond the walls that reminded Jack Turner the world outside was still hostile. Emily adjusted her glasses, pushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and slid a handheld scanner across the German shepherd's neck. The device beeped sharp and final, its screen glowing with a line of numbers. Jack leaned closer, recognizing the structure of a legitimate K9 microchip ID. Emily frowned and typed the digits into her computer, her eyes narrowing as the database responded. She turned the screen toward Jack, her voice steady but her expression troubled. According to official records, this chip was deactivated 6 months ago. It was logged as destroyed. Jack felt the weight of her words press against him. Microchips did not deactivate themselves. For a number to be flagged as destroyed, someone higher up had to submit the paperwork. It was not a clerical mistake. It was deliberate erasure. He rested one hand on the counter, staring at the numbers. The dog shifted slightly under the blanket, her breathing shallow but consistent. She carried both exhaustion and strength, the quiet resilience of an animal used to following orders and enduring hardship. "So someone wanted her off the record," Jack said softly. Emily nodded, her green eyes serious. "This isn't just abandonment, Jack. She was erased from existence. That takes authority." Jack's mind returned to Ricky Vaughn's words at the fence, the way he called her cargo. It now made sense why he showed no fear when Jack confronted him. He believed he had the protection of people beyond county borders. Jack stepped back, pressing his palm over his holster unconsciously. He understood now that he was not simply guarding a wounded animal. He was protecting evidence, and not just against men like Ricky, but against those who could bend systems from behind desks. The clinic lights flickered once as the storm strained the grid. Emily glanced up at the ceiling and murmured, "We'll run the backup generator if it goes out." Jack moved toward the front lobby, checking locks and blinds. Snow lashed against the glass doors, and the parking lot was empty except for his cruiser buried in a shallow drift. As he turned back, the bell over the clinic door chimed suddenly. Both Jack and Emily froze. A man stepped inside, shoulders hunched against the cold, his coat dusted white, his scarf wrapped high. His eyes darted around the lobby before settling on Jack. "Roads shut down," the man said in a voice that carried weariness. "Got caught walking after my truck died. Can I wait the storm out in here?" Jack studied him, measuring posture, tone, and the sheen of sweat despite the cold air. Emily hesitated, then nodded politely. "Of course, sir. Come in from the storm." Jack gave her a subtle glance but said nothing, trusting his instincts to stay sharp. The man moved closer to the counter, rubbing his hands as if trying to warm them. He asked casual questions about the power, about whether the roads would open by morning, and Jack answered with short sentences, his eyes never leaving him. The German shepherd gave a low whine from the exam room. Emily moved quickly to soothe her, while Jack noticed the stranger's gaze flick toward the sound, too intent for a casual passerby. When Emily bent down, the man slipped a hand into his coat pocket and drew out a small phone. He angled it quickly toward the exam room doorway, the faint click of a camera betraying him. Jack moved instantly, closing the space between them with controlled speed. He gripped the man's wrist firmly, the phone still in his hand. "Who are you sending that to?" "Jack?" asked, his voice calm but heavy. The man's eyes widened, and in that instant he jerked free, stumbling back toward the door. Jack lunged, but the man twisted the knob and slipped into the storm snow swirling around his outline before it vanished into the night. Jack reached the door and pulled it shut, locking it again, his pulse racing. He turned to Emily, who had risen quickly, her face pale. "He was taking photos of her," Jack said. Emily looked toward the shepherd, then back at him. "Then they know she's alive." Jack exhaled slowly, his breath heavy in the warm air of the clinic. The pieces pressed together too tightly to ignore. Ricky had been waiting for a handoff. Carl Harris had whispered into his radio. The microchip was erased by someone with power. And now a stranger had risked the storm to photograph the dog, ensuring proof of her survival reached whoever Ricky served. Emily steadied herself and asked quietly, "What do we do now?" Jack did not answer right away. He pulled the blinds tighter and checked his sidearm. Outside, the storm hid everything. But Jack knew eyes were searching through the snow, waiting for the moment to strike. He looked at the dog resting under Emily's care and made a silent promise. He would hold this line until he found the source, and he would not let them erase her again. The storm finally broke sometime before dawn, leaving Silver Ridge under a heavy quilt of snow that glistened like powdered glass in the pale morning light. Deputy Jack Turner stepped out of the clinic where he had kept vigil all night, his breath rising in white clouds. The town was silent, except for the scrape of distant shovels and the cough of a few old engines struggling to start. He walked toward his cruiser, its frame half buried near the corner of the lot, ready to brush it clean and drive back to the station. But when his boots crunched closer, he stopped cold. Both front tires sagged flat against the ice rubber, shredded in deliberate gashes. Jack crouched, brushing frost away from the wheel well, and saw the marks a knife cut, not road damage. The snow near the tires was pressed with the imprint of boots angled toward the road, leaving deep divots where someone had crouched. He followed the prints to the street where they merged with the wide tread of a heavier vehicle. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing, recognizing the distinctive pattern of snow chains that belonged not to a common car, but to Ricky Vaughn's beaten-up pickup. Ricky had circled back under cover of the storm. He was still in Silver Ridge, still watching. Jack walked back toward the clinic door, his mind heavy with the knowledge that the game had shifted from hidden signals to open defiance. He would need another vehicle, but more urgently he needed to move evidence and people before Ricky struck again. When Emily Carter appeared in the doorway, wrapping her coat tighter against the chill, Jack told her about the damage. She pressed her lips together and said nothing, only tightening her hold on the shepherd's lead as if bracing against the invisible presence that stalked them. Jack made a quick decision. "I'll head to the station first," he said. "Keep her here until I call. Lock every door." Emily nodded, though her eyes betrayed worry. He borrowed her old Jeep from the back lot, a rusty vehicle with mismatched doors but chains on the tires. The engine coughed alive reluctantly, then settled into a rough idle. He drove through the empty streets of Silver Ridge, passing shuttered shops with roofs piled high in snow, every window glazed in frost. The storm had cleared, but left the town shrunken, as if under siege from silence. When Jack pulled up to the station, the sight of it made his chest tighten. Snow was banked high against the brick walls, and the flag outside hung limp, weighed down by ice. He parked and climbed the steps, brushing snow from his jacket, then paused at the front door. The mailbox beside the entrance, usually filled with forms and routine letters, had one single envelope inside. He pulled it out, the paper stiff, and creased his name written across the front in heavy black ink. Inside was a single sheet. The message was shortcut from words printed in newspapers and pasted into lines like an old ransom note. "Return the dog, or the whole town pays." Jack stood in the vestibule, reading the words again, feeling the weight of the threat press into his ribs. He imagined Ricky out there, hiding in the snow, and behind him, a hand stronger than his pulling strings. Jack folded the letter carefully into an evidence bag and carried it into his office. The station was quiet, a skeleton crew working phones and radios. A young officer named Matthew Harlan lifted his head from dispatch, offering a weary nod, but Jack only motioned for silence. He closed his office door and sat at his desk, laying the envelope beside the map he had found in the collar. First the erased chip, then the stranger taking photographs, now a message delivered to the heart of town. They were no longer whispering in shadows. They were warning him, openly daring him to resist. Jack opened his case log, wrote down the time and place, then pinned the letter to the corkboard above his desk. He knew that once such a warning was issued, silence would not follow. Threats unchallenged only grew sharper. He rubbed his temples and considered the danger. If the people of Silver Ridge were dragged into this, it would not just be his burden to carry. He thought of Emily, of her quiet strength, of the shepherd trembling under her care. He thought of Ricky carving circles in the snow while watching them from a distance. He knew one thing for certain: they would not stop until they reclaimed the dog. Jack looked out the frosted window toward Main Street, where a few townsfolk were beginning to shovel porches. He wondered how many of them would be put in harm's way if he made the wrong move. His pulse quickened, but beneath it there was a colder resolve. He would not surrender the dog, not to Ricky, not to anyone pulling threads from beyond. If they wanted to use threats to shake him, they had underestimated both his patience and his memory. Jack pushed back from the desk, slid the evidence bag into a drawer, and locked it. Then he checked his weapon, strapped his coat tighter, and prepared for the day ahead. This was no longer a rescue. It was a standoff that could drag every person in town into the crosshairs. The winter sun slid away early, and by nightfall the station was wrapped in a silence so deep that even the heating vents seemed to whisper instead of hum. Jack Turner lingered at his desk long after the others had gone home. The letter of warning still pinned to his corkboard like a black cloud that refused to lift. He had written his report, locked away the evidence, and double-checked every entrance, but something gnawed at him, the sense that walls and locks, no longer meant safety. Midnight passed, and the storm outside had quieted to a brittle stillness. Jack finally closed his eyes in the chair, drifting into a half-sleep, his service pistol within reach. The sound that woke him was not loud. It was a subtle scrape, like a drawer easing shut in the wrong rhythm. Jack's eyes snapped open. He rose silently, every step measured, until he reached the corridor. The faintest glow spilled from the records room at the end of the hall. He drew his weapon, checked the corner, and entered. Cabinets stood open. Files lay scattered across the floor, but nothing else was missing. Not weapons, not narcotics, not cash from evidence lockers. Instead, one drawer yawned empty, the section where Dr. Emily Carter's medical records had been filed after last night. The folder marked with the German Shepherd's ID was gone. Jack stood in the middle of the disarray, the hairs on the back of his neck stiff. Whoever had broken in had not come for weapons. They had come only for her information. He crouched, ran his fingers along the edge of a dropped file, and saw melted snow on the tile. The intruder had not left long ago. Jack straightened, heart steady but heavy. The storm had given Ricky's network cover, and now even the walls of the station were compromised. He replaced the loose files, quickly closed the drawers, and reset the locks. By the time dawn broke gray and pale, his thoughts were sharper than the cold outside. He was not fighting strangers anymore. He was fighting someone who knew exactly where to look. At mid-morning, as townsfolk began clearing sidewalks and shop owners reopened doors with tentative optimism, Jack sat in the break room nursing a stale cup of coffee. The door opened with a creak, and Officer Mike Collins stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. Mike was broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and had been with the department almost as long as Jack. He carried the weathered calm of a man who had seen too many winters and too many crimes. But this morning his eyes carried something else unease. He closed the door quietly behind him and lowered his voice. "Jack, I've been hearing things," Mike said. Jack set his cup down, waiting. Last night's break-in, Mike continued, that wasn't just Ricky or one of his men. They knew what to take and what to leave. No wasted time, no mistakes. That kind of precision means someone's feeding them from inside. Jack felt the words settle heavy, though he had already suspected as much. Mike leaned closer. "I don't know who, and I won't point fingers without proof, but be careful. Somebody here is passing information, and if they're already inside the chain, you can't trust every radio call or every locked drawer." Jack exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He thought of the stolen records, the stranger with the camera, the erased chip. Each piece pointed toward hands pulling strings well beyond Ricky Vaughn's temper. If the leak was real, then the station itself was compromised. Mike straightened, his face drawn. "Watch your back," he said simply, then left the room, leaving Jack alone with the echo of his warning. Jack sat in the quiet, replaying every shift change, every face in the station, every detail from the night before. He realized that from this point forward, each step he took would have to be more guarded, more deliberate. If Ricky's reach extended into his own department, then protecting the shepherd and uncovering the truth would demand not just vigilance, but secrecy. He looked toward the frosted window where snowflakes drifted like falling ash. The enemy was no longer just outside in the storm. The enemy might already be walking his halls. Jack Turner drove north out of Silver Ridge with the map folded on the seat beside him, the Jeep's tires cutting narrow tracks through snow that still clung thick on the county roads. He had not told anyone about this trip, not even Mike Collins, because if there truly was a leak inside the department, then secrecy was his only shield. The German Shepherd remained with Dr. Emily Carter at the clinic under her careful watch, and though Jack's instinct urged him to keep her close, he knew leading her into a potential trap would be reckless. He followed the red line on the map until the road narrowed to a timber path, the kind used years ago for logging trucks, but long since abandoned. Branches arched overhead, heavy with frost, casting shadows that shifted across his windshield. After another mile, he saw it a small wooden cabin slouched against the weight of years, its roof patched in places with rusted tin. The storm had pressed snow against the walls, sealing windows halfway shut, but smoke stains above the chimney told him someone had once lived here. He parked 100 yards back, stepped into the silence, and moved forward on foot. The door hung open, slightly creaking when he pushed it, and the smell inside was thick and sharp. Iron mildew and something older. His flashlight swept across the room, revealing rows of cages stacked against the walls. The cages were empty now, doors hanging crooked, but tufts of fur clung to the wire, and dark stains smeared the wooden planks beneath them. Jack crouched and touched one stain with his gloved fingers, the color too deep to be rust. Blood dried into the wood. His jaw tightened as he imagined the animals once held here trained or broken, until they served whatever purpose men like Ricky demanded. He moved slowly through the single room, noting the way boards sagged in the center of the floor. He tapped one boot against a plank and heard a hollow echo. Kneeling, he brushed snow dust aside and pried at the seam with his knife. The board lifted with a reluctant groan, revealing a cavity beneath. Inside lay a metal box, its lid marked with dents, its latch rusted but still secure. Jack pulled it free and carried it to the light near the door. The box was heavy, solid, with something more than tools. He forced the latch open with effort and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked in rows, were collars. Not cheap nylon straps, but heavy-duty K9 collars, each engraved with a badge number and agency initials. Some bore tags from towns he recognized across Montana, others from counties farther away. Jack's stomach tightened as he lifted one collar after another, the collection too large to be coincidence. These were not abandoned pets. These were police dogs, trained and trusted, now stripped of their identities and discarded like trophies. He sat back on his heels, staring at the grim evidence. The erased microchip in the shepherd, the cages, the blood, and now a chest of collars. The pattern was undeniable. Someone had built an entire trade around taking trained canines from departments, erasing their records and repurposing them as tools for smuggling or worse. Jack sealed the collars back into the box and carried it outside, setting it into the Jeep's back seat under a blanket. He knew this find was proof, but proof alone would not stop men like Ricky. It would only provoke them further. The woods around him seemed too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when something watches. He scanned the tree line before starting the engine, his senses sharpened. Driving back, he kept replaying the scene in his mind, the blood on the floor, the cages, the collars that had once meant service and loyalty. He thought of the shepherd lying at Emily's clinic, her eyes still full of guarded trust, and realized she was not the only victim. She was the only one who had survived long enough to be found. Jack gripped the wheel tighter, snow hissing under the tires as the road curved back toward Silver Ridge. His discovery was no longer just evidence. It was a warning of what waited beyond the next line of trees. The storm returned before Jack Turner reached Silver Ridge, blowing in from the north with sharper teeth than before. By the time he pulled the Jeep into town, the sheriff's office had already set up emergency protocols. Streets filled with headlights and bundled figures, families leaving homes near the river where drifts and ice threatened to cut off power. School buses idled with their engines running ready to carry people toward the high school gym, which now doubled as an evacuation center. Jack stepped out, snow crunching under his boots, the weight of the metal box of K9 collars still heavy in his mind. He handed the evidence off to Officer Mike Collins, whispering instructions to lock it in the most secure room. Mike gave a firm nod, but reminded him again to trust no one without question. Jack's eyes scanned the crowd moving through Main Street, parents shepherding children, neighbors carrying blankets and bags. The storm had disguised many faces under scarves and hoods. Somewhere among them, he knew Ricky Vaughn could walk unnoticed. Ricky was smart enough to use chaos as cover. Jack stood near the barricade, watching carefully when a figure in a brown parka hesitated longer than most, glancing at every uniform before shuffling forward again. Jack felt the hair rise on his neck, but before he could close the distance, the man blended into the next group boarding a bus, the scarf high over his face. Jack caught only the briefest flash of a tattoo on his neck half hidden by wool. His jaw tightened. Ricky was here, moving with evacuees vanishing into the shuffle of boots on ice and voices calling in the wind. Jack wanted to pursue, but knew drawing a weapon in a panicked crowd would risk lives. He let the moment pass, but marked it in his mind. Ricky was circling close again, not just watching, but embedding himself among the very people Jack was sworn to protect. The evacuation traffic thickened until a line of vehicles backed along the highway. Deputies set up a checkpoint at the edge of town, waving cars through while checking for stranded neighbors. Jack joined them, his eyes sharp despite the fatigue. That was when a faded red truck rolled forward, its tailgate sagging, the driver, Tom Weaver, gripping the wheel nervously. Tom was a local hauler, known more for his chatter at the diner than for trouble. But tonight his eyes avoided Jack's gaze, fixed straight ahead. Jack motioned for him to stop, lifted his flashlight, and circled the vehicle. Snow dust coated the rear bumper, but the weight pressed deep on the springs. "Hauling something heavy, Tom?" Jack asked, tapping the side panel. Tom forced a chuckle, explaining he had loaded supplies from his cousin's barn before the storm worsened, but his voice cracked and sweat beaded despite the cold. Jack opened the tailgate, and the beam of his light cut across rows of boxes stacked tight. The lettering on the sides was unmistakable veterinary supplies. Jack tore one flap open, revealing vials glinting in the light. He lifted a bottle, the label spelling it out clearly: ketamine, a powerful animal tranquilizer. He counted quickly, dozens of bottles, too many for any legal order. Jack's stomach turned cold. Emily Carter's clinic had reported nothing missing yet, but this amount could only have been taken from her stores and recently. He looked up at Tom, whose face had drained of color. "Where did you get this?" Jack asked quietly. Tom stammered, fumbling for an explanation that never came. Jack ordered him out of the cab and signaled 2 deputies to cuff him. The man obeyed, his legs unsteady, muttering that he had been paid cash to make a delivery. Jack pressed for who had hired him, but Tom only shook his head, insisting he never saw the man's face, only received instructions through a burner phone. Jack stepped back, letting the deputies secure the truck. His thoughts churned. The tranquilizers were not for accidents or stolen resale. They were intended for the dogs. For Dakota, for her unborn pups, for any others still out there. This was part of the same chain he had been chasing since the night at the lumberyard. He felt the storm press harder around him, as if echoing the weight of the revelation. Ricky Vaughn had slipped through the crowd tonight, and now stolen veterinary supplies surfaced at a checkpoint. Jack knew these were not random strikes. They were coordinated moves in a larger game, with Ricky acting as both enforcer and messenger. Jack tightened his gloves, signaling to secure the evidence. He glanced back toward town, where evacuees filled buses and shelters. Somewhere Ricky was watching, and now the enemy had tools sharp enough to silence any animal that stood in their way. The evacuation shelters filled, and the storm showed no sign of relenting. Jack Turner returned to Dr. Emily Carter's clinic with the confiscated evidence secured at the station, his mind heavy with the image of Ricky blending into the evacuees. The German Shepherd lay on blankets in the exam room, her eyes sharp but her body restless, a tension in her breathing that made Emily check her twice in quick succession. Jack stood near the window watching snow drift across the empty street when a sudden crash echoed from the back lot. Emily startled, and the shepherd lifted her head, ears pricked. Jack drew his weapon and moved toward the sound, but before he reached the door, the dog whimpered and then curled tightly, her belly heaving. Emily's voice tightened. "She's going into labor, Jack. Too early, but it's happening now." Jack froze for a heartbeat torn between danger outside and the fragile life before him. Then he made his choice. He locked the back door, pulled a cabinet across it, and returned to Emily's side. The German Shepherd strained, panting hard, her amber eyes flicking between Jack and Emily, as though asking for both their presence. Emily sat up swiftly, laying towels and preparing warm cloths. Jack knelt beside her, resting a steady hand against the dog's neck, murmuring quiet words the way he once calmed frightened recruits overseas. Outside, another thud sounded this time against the front shutters. Jack's instincts screamed that Ricky's men had tracked them here, pressing closer with the storm as their cover. He told Emily to keep working and moved into the hall, weapon raised. Through the slats, he caught a glimpse of shadows moving past the snow-glare figures crouched low. He fired a warning shot into the air, the report cracking across the frozen street. The shadows scattered, but he knew it was only for the moment. He returned quickly, his pulse tight, and found Emily guiding the shepherd through another contraction. Jack crouched beside her, splitting his focus between the door and the trembling animal. The room smelled of antiseptic and snow damp, the kind of contrast that burned itself into memory. Emily's voice was calm but brisk. "She needs you steady. Keep her from panicking." Jack rested both hands gently against the dog's shoulders, speaking low. "Easy, girl. You've carried this far. We've got you." Minutes dragged into what felt like hours until a small body slid onto the blanket, slick and still. Emily worked fast, clearing the airway, rubbing until a faint squeak filled the room. The pup writhed weakly, then nestled against its mother's warmth. Relief flickered in Jack's chest, but there was no time to celebrate. A heavy strike rattled the side door louder than before. The gang outside was testing every entrance. Emily pressed the pup closer to the shepherd, while Jack shoved a file cabinet against the door. The dog strained again, another contraction racking her. Jack returned, pressing his palm against her chest, his voice carrying quiet strength. "You're safe just a little longer." A second pup came smaller, but breathing strong. Emily wrapped it quickly, her face pale with focus. Jack let out a breath, then noticed something strange. Beneath the fur of the shepherd's left flank, just above the ribline, was a ridge he had not seen before. At first he thought it was scar tissue, but as the dog shifted, the shape beneath the skin pressed unnaturally metallic in outline. He frowned, brushed the fur aside, and felt with careful pressure. A hard edge moved beneath his fingertips. Emily's eyes widened. "Jack, that's not natural." He fetched a scalpel from her tray, his hands steady despite the pounding on the walls outside. With her nod, he made a shallow incision, revealing the glint of metal. He drew out a device the size of a coin smeared with blood, a GPS tracker stitched into her body. Jack's breath caught. "They've been following her the whole time." Emily's face went pale. That's how they always knew. Jack snapped the device into a sterile container, sealing it away, but the revelation struck deeper than any wound. Ricky and his men had never been searching blindly. They had always been led straight to her. Outside, another blow shook the walls, the storm carrying muffled voices closer. Jack looked at the mother shepherd, now curled protectively around her two newborns, her breath ragged but determined. He felt the weight of duty sharpen into resolve. They wanted her because she was evidence. They wanted her pups because they were leverage. But he would not let this place fall. He slid his pistol onto the counter chamber, checked eyes fixed on the door. His voice was low but certain. "They'll come through soon, Emily. Keep them close. I'll hold the line." Jack Turner spent the remainder of that night moving the German shepherd and her two newborn pups to a safer location, aware that the storm had become a shield for both him and his enemies. Dr. Emily Carter stayed with the mother, her hands steady though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. By dawn, the pounding on the clinic walls had ceased, leaving only snowdrifts as evidence of the siege. Jack knew Ricky Vaughn would not give up. He left Emily with an armed officer guarding the mother and pups while he followed a set of tire tracks leading out of town. They wound north toward the abandoned freight district, where a cluster of empty warehouses sat like silent sentinels. The snow muffled every sound, but Jack's instincts told him he was being watched. He pushed open the door of one warehouse gun, drawn, his boots crunching on the frozen floor. A shadow moved across the beams above, and before he could adjust, Ricky stepped out from the darkness. His face was pale with strain, his coat torn, yet his eyes still carried the same menace Jack had seen in the snowstorm that night of the rescue. Ricky held no gun, only a crowbar, yet the tension in his stance was unmistakable. "You don't get it, Deputy," he said, voice echoing against steel walls. "I was never the one calling the shots." Jack kept his pistol trained on him. "Then tell me who is." Ricky smirked, though his breath came shallow. "I'm just the hand that does the work. The real buyer, the one who pays for these dogs, he's waiting across the border. The shepherd was meant to be delivered to him. You've only slowed the deal, not stopped it." Jack stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Then where's this buyer?" Ricky shook his head. "Too late. He'll find another way. I was only here to deliver cargo and clean up loose ends." Jack's grip tightened. The image of the hidden GPS device flashed in his mind, proof that this conspiracy reached further than Silver Ridge. Before Jack could press him, another set of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Jack shifted his weapon, rising toward the sound, but when the figure stepped into the light, Jack's breath caught. It was Lieutenant David Miller, his longtime colleague, a man he had trusted since his earliest days at the department. David's winter coat bore the insignia of their force, his badge gleaming faintly under the warehouse light. Relief almost washed over Jack, but it faltered when he saw Ricky's smirk widen. David lifted his hands slightly as if in surrender, yet his words were calm. "Jack, you need to put that weapon down." Confusion and dread warred in Jack's chest. "What are you doing here, David?" The lieutenant sighed, his eyes carrying something colder than regret. "I should have told you sooner, but the truth is I've been keeping the balance in this town longer than you've been wearing that badge. Ricky is reckless, but the man he works for keeps the border quiet. Sometimes peace costs something, Jack." "I chose to pay it." Jack shook his head, betrayal slicing deeper than any wound. "You sold out our people. You sold out the law." David's jaw tightened. "I prevented worse bloodshed. Do you think the cartel cares about Silver Ridge? Do you think Washington will send help if they decide to carve their routes through here? No. I gave them what they wanted to keep them from taking more." Ricky laughed softly, enjoying the fracture between the two men. Jack steadied his weapon, his mind racing. The pups, Emily the shepherd, they were the leverage. He had to keep focus. "You're going to regret this, David," Jack said quietly. "You picked the wrong side." David's eyes narrowed. "No, Jack. I picked survival." Then he drew his own weapon, raising it smoothly, aimed directly at Jack. For a heartbeat, the warehouse became a frozen tableau, Ricky's crowbar glinting, David's pistol trained, and Jack standing between them, torn between anger and duty. The storm outside howled against the steel walls, a reminder that time was running out. Jack tightened his stance, ready for whatever would come next. Ricky's laugh still echoed in the hollow warehouse, a taunt carried on the cold air, while David Miller's pistol stayed trained on Jack. The betrayal weighed like ice in Jack's chest, yet his grip on his weapon remained firm. Ricky shifted his crowbar in one hand and a small handgun in the other, his eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a predator who believed the hunt was nearly over. David spoke with a quiet finality that cut through the storm outside. "Put it down, Jack. Walk away, and I'll make sure your name isn't buried with the rest." Jack's jaw tightened, his voice low but steady. "I swore to protect this town, David. That oath doesn't end when the storm blows harder." The warehouse seemed to hold its breath as all three men stood locked in that deadly triangle, each second stretching like wire ready to snap. Then, in the silence, a sound no one expected broke through a low growl, ragged but fierce. From the shadowed entrance, the German shepherd staggered forward. Her body was thin from labor, her fur damp with sweat, yet her eyes burned with a fire no storm could quench. She had left her pups hidden behind a cabinet at the clinic, instincts pulling her back to the man who had saved her. Ricky cursed under his breath and swung his gun toward her, but before he could squeeze the trigger, the dog lunged. With a sudden burst of strength, she clamped her jaws on Ricky's wrist, forcing his shot wild into the steel beams above. The gun clattered to the floor as Ricky screamed, twisting violently to free himself, but the shepherd's teeth only sank deeper. Jack seized the moment. He lunged forward, striking Ricky's arm and knocking the crowbar away. In the same motion, he wrenched the man to the ground, cuffing him with a swift click of steel. David raised his weapon, fury flashing across his features, but Jack was faster. He rolled behind a support beam, returning aim with precision. His voice rang out sharp. "It's over, David. Stand down." David's hand trembled, his years of service and friendship battling the corruption that had taken root inside him. For a moment, Jack thought he might lower the weapon, but then the shepherd, still standing guard, growled again, her teeth bared in defiance. David faltered, the sight of the dog's loyalty piercing through his resolve. Jack advanced, weapon steady. "You were better than this once. Don't make me finish it here." Slowly, David's shoulders sagged. The pistol slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. Jack moved swiftly, cuffing his former friend, while the shepherd stood at his side, her breath ragged but proud. Outside, the storm began to ease, the heavy snowfall thinning into a gentle curtain of flakes. The sound of approaching engines carried through the frozen air, state police responding to Jack's earlier signal. Floodlights cut through the gloom as tactical teams swept into the warehouse, securing the area with calm efficiency. Officers surrounded Ricky and David, leading them away as Jack gave his report, the weight of the night finally lifting from his shoulders. The German shepherd leaned against his leg, her body trembling with exhaustion. Jack knelt beside her, his hand resting on her head. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "You did more than anyone could ask." Emily arrived moments later, her face pale with worry, but softening when she saw the dog alive beside Jack. "She's strong," Emily said, kneeling to check her quickly. "And so are her pups. They're all going to make it." Relief surged through Jack, deeper than any victory in his career. As the storm cleared, sunlight broke weakly over Silver Ridge, casting a golden glow across the snow-laden town. Days later, in the quiet aftermath, the German shepherd gave birth to the rest of her litter, 5 healthy puppies, each one strong and breathing. Jack was there for every moment, his presence steady, his hand always near. Emily smiled when he picked up the runt with the white patch on its chest. "She trusts you," Emily said softly. Jack nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Then she deserves a name." He looked at the mother, her amber eyes calm at last, and whispered, "Grace." The name carried the weight of survival, a tribute to her courage and the miracle of life she had carried through the storm. Grace and her puppies became the heartbeat of Silver Ridge in the weeks that followed. With Emily's guidance and the support of townspeople who had rallied during the crisis, Jack oversaw the transformation of an old firehouse into something new, the Silver Ridge K-9 Rescue and Training Center. Volunteers cleaned and repaired the space, donations filled it with supplies, and local children hung handmade banners across the walls. On the opening day, the town gathered, bundled in coats and scarves, their faces shining with hope. The mayor spoke of second chances of loyalty that never wavered, and of the bond between humans and their guardians. Jack stood quietly beside Emily Grace at his heel, her pups safe in a warm enclosure nearby. He felt the applause ripple through the crowd, but kept his eyes on the shepherd. She had carried them all through darkness, and now she was the symbol of a new beginning. That night, after the crowd had gone and the firehouse glowed with soft light, Jack walked the length of the new kennels. Grace padded beside him, her pups trailing like small shadows. Emily joined him, her voice gentle. "You gave this town more than safety, Jack. You gave them something to believe in again." Jack looked around the firehouse at the warmth where once there had been only cold and nodded. "She gave it to us," he said, glancing down at Grace. "We just followed her lead." Grace pressed against his leg, her eyes calm, her family safe. For the first time in years, Jack felt the storm inside him ease, replaced by a quiet certainty that light could follow even the darkest night. That was the story of courage, loyalty, and second chances from the snowy town of Silver Ridge. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which moment struck you the most? Was it Jack's discovery in the storm, the betrayal he uncovered, or Grace standing her ground when all seemed lost? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories of hope and redemption.